Now, we've been looking at this idea of mounted elbow escapes in static situations. Our opponent was mounted on us, and we saw if our opponent is naive and exposes his ankles, then it's a good thing for us to use ankle-based methods of elbow escaping, where we trap the ankle first, and then we go into capture our opponent's knee. But always remember, your primary goal when you go to elbow escape is to capture the knee of your opponent's leg. Okay, only when you've captured the knee on one side can you then turn to the other and complete the elbow escape. There's no going from one side to the other until the knee is captured. Most people coach to start with the ankle and progress to the knee. That's fine as long as my opponent's feet are exposed. However, a good opponent will always keep his feet very close together, and as a result, ankle-centered methods of elbow escape tend to be problematic on good people. That's why I'm a big advocate of knee-centered elbow escapes in these situations. If you've got a static opponent who's mounted on top of you, it's a good thing just to go straight for the knee. And we saw a whole bunch of ways, mostly built around the idea of a deeper way of looking at the fundamental movement of escape in jiu-jitsu, the shrimping method. We've distinguished between a sliding shrimp and a rising shrimp, and we saw that rising shrimp method, which is half bridging, half shrimping, is the way to go to expose our opponent's knee, give us inside position, get inside the wedge of his knee, and elbow escape back to safety. Now, a natural thing to ask is, why are you so down on ankle-based methods? Well, you can see when Mateus was mounted on me in a static situation and his feet were tied together, it's very, very difficult to capture his ankle. But there are other situations where it's easy to capture an ankle. We've looked at static situations where my opponent was mounted on top of me. Let's look now at dynamic situations where my opponent is progressing into the mount from a side position. My contention is this: if your opponent is already mounted on you and he knows what he's doing and he's hiding his feet, focus on the knee-centered elbow escapes that I showed you. But if your opponent is in a dynamic situation, moving on top of you, then my contention is you should focus on on ankle-based methods. Let's have a look at the distinction. Mateus is across my side. From here, Mateus senses an opportunity to slide his right knee into the mounted position. Right about here, Mateus's knee passes a critical point, the point of my belly button, the center line. As Mateus's knee goes to the center line, I'm going to turn my body to face the same direction he's moving, and I'm going to split my legs. Let's go back a step. Currently, my two knees are facing towards the ceiling. As Mateus puts his knee towards my center line and starts to drive across to the mount, I start the action of splitting my legs and facing the same direction that he's facing. Now, as he drives forward into the mount, watch Mateus's right foot. It will become exposed to the splitting of my legs and the triangle, and I capture his foot very easily. Now from here, I'm going to shrimp and bring his knee off the floor, and as a result, I can easily stuff his knee between my legs and capture the knee. Once we capture the knee, we know now it's safe to complete the elbow escape. Let's have a look at that again. Mateus is across my side. He's interested in scoring points. He's past my guard, obviously, and at this point, if he's able to get into the mounted position, he'll add 4 points to his score. So, as I feel his knee come across my stomach, as it passes my center line, if I stay where I am, it's very hard for me to capture my opponent's foot. Let's go back a step. So if I stay facing up towards the ceiling and Mateus's knee goes across, look how difficult it is for me to capture his foot. However, if, as I feel Mateus move across my center line, I turn and split my legs, I create a space where as he goes forward into the mount, it's very easy for me to triangle around his foot. And then from here, we shift our hips in the opposite direction to bring his knee off the mat. And as a result, it's very easy to capture his knee. Our great rule of thumb is that once we capture a knee, there's no reason why we can't go across to the other side and from here lock up our feet and go back to the safety of guard. My contention is this: in dynamic situations where people are trying to get mounted on you, usually from a side position, the movement as they move into the mount makes their feet vulnerable to being caught. All it takes is some kind of changing in direction on my part to expose their foot and enable me to lock a triangle around it. Once I capture the foot, you can almost always capture the knee. This is a situation where I am a true believer in ankle-based method of elbow escaping. Let's have a look at it from another angle. Here, Mateus is moving his knee across my center line. So I turn and split my legs so that Mateus's knee runs into my elbow. Now, as he goes across into what he thinks will be the mounted position, it's so easy for me to scissor my legs and lock a triangle. Even though his knee is now on the floor, he's not really mounted because I have the ankle. And it's so easy under these circumstances to put his knee up in the air. Then from here, it's a simple thing for me to stuff the knee between my legs and use that fundamental serpentine action to put my opponent back in guard. This trick of turning with my opponent always exposes my opponent's ankle, and it's a fine way for me to get a hold of that ankle, and ultimately, if I can get to an ankle, I can get to a knee. If I can get to a knee, then I can go from one side to the other and complete my elbow escape. Now, we're starting to change our elbow escapes from static situations where my opponent is mounted on top of me and just not moving. That's one kind of problem. Now we're shifting our focus to dynamic situations where my opponent is going into the mount. So he was across my side and he's working his way to the mount. Always remember, your mounted escapes are going to fall into those two categories. They're either going to be static situations where your opponent has already achieved the mounted position and he's locked onto you. And that's one kind of problem. Then there's dynamic situations where he's working his way into the mount, and there's different kinds of opportunities to escape. We just looked at a situation where my opponent was on my right side and he worked his way into the mount and we elbow escaped on the left side. Now we're going to look at a situation where he's on the right side and we elbow escape opposite right side. So Mateus, come on this side, Mateus. Is in the side position. Once again, I feel Mateus taking his knee across my stomach. Let's understand something. As Mateus's knee goes onto my center line and starts driving across, his weight distribution starts to change. Put your knee back on the floor. Currently, 50% of Mateus's weight is on his right knee and 50% is on the left knee. Once his right knee starts to go across my stomach, that starts to change. The further he goes across my stomach, the more the weight starts to go on the right penetrating knee. And the lighter the back knee, the trail knee, becomes. I'm going to learn to take advantage of that. As Mateus moves across, I'm going to flatten out my leg just like so. And as he starts coming across and most of the weight goes onto the right knee, the left knee now becomes very, very light. And as a result, we can easily lock onto our training partner's leg. Now, Mateus is in a bit of a bind at this point because there's some back exposure here. It's starting to get, this is not a desirable situation for him. If he's naive and stays in a situation like this, I can easily switch my legs and start to come around behind Mateus and use my underhook to expose his back. So it's very much in Mateus's best interest to take his arm back and face me. And when that occurs, it's very easy for us to complete the elbow escape, and from here we can go back into a fighting situation. Let's have a look at that again. Mateus is across my right hand side. He's interested in the idea of getting mounted and scoring some extra points. If he does get mounted, he's going to score 4 points. That's a good thing for him. Let's understand that Mateus's weight is evenly distributed between his two knees at this point. Neither knee bears more weight than the other. But once his knee starts penetrating across my center line, things start to change. Most of his weight is now on his right knee. And because the left knee is becoming light, it's very easy for me to put my elbow underneath it, straighten out my leg, and capture my training partner's leg, I can go straight to the knee here. There's no need to capture the ankle first. We're just going to take the short route and go straight to the knee. Now, he's mounted on my with his right knee, but the left knee is not. And as a result, it's very easy for me to capture his leg at the knee like so. As he tries to reclaim the safety position by moving back and away, otherwise I'll take his back in the situation, it's very easy for me now to bring everything inside. And from here, we're in a position to start our countering attack. We're learning to take advantage of a change in weight distribution. Always remember that whenever a human being goes to move, there's going to be a change in weight distribution. This is true whether on the standing position or down on the floor. Learn to take advantage of changing weight distributions as your opponents move around you in pins. This is one of the quintessential examples of this. As my opponent employs his right knee to drive forward, all the weight goes on the right knee. The lighter his left knee becomes, the easier it becomes to elbow escape on that side. Learn to take advantage of this, and you'll find you'll hit many easy elbow escapes as your opponent dynamically transitions into the mounted position. Now, we're looking at the idea of dynamic situations where our opponent is moving into the mounted position. So unlike the static situations that we began with, now he's across my side and he's moving into the mounted position. Always note there are several different ways in which my opponent can move into the mounted position. At fundamental level, there are two main ways. There are knee drive methods, where my opponent drives his knee across my center line, usually along the line of the belt. And there are also step over methods. Let's have a look at the two. Slide down, Matthias. Okay. Knee drive methods are usually done out of some kind of cross-face position, just like so. And the idea is I take my knee and I start to drive across my training partner's belt line. And as a result, from here, we can quickly turn this into the mounted position. Okay? This stands in contrast to step over methods, where typically we bring our arms through and we sit through next to our training partner like so. From the sit through position, we elevate our hips, we catch our training partner's far leg, and we take our foot and we step our foot over our training partner's hip. And then from this position, I drive my knee to the mat, we hook into our training partner's hips, and from here we find ourselves in the mounted position. Okay? So these are the two most commonly seen methods of mounting an opponent in introductory jiu-jitsu, and it's very important that we have effective elbow escapes against both of them. We've seen how to stop a knee drive method. What about the step over method? What do we do now? Okay, Matthias is across my side and he takes his arm here, his second hand comes in here, and I feel him begin to make the step over. Let's understand something. As Matthias steps over, his weight distribution starts to change. As his right foot slaps the mat, foot lands first, you're good. As the foot touches the mat on this side, he's going to have to put his knee down on the floor. You can see what's happening. This leg here will become light as the other leg becomes heavy. Currently, most of the weight is on this leg. It has to be because the center of gravity is over that leg. But as Matthias's hips move forward, this leg will become light, and it becomes very easy for me to reach across and capture my training partner's ankle, just like so. Now from here, we've got a hold of the ankle, ultimately the knee, as he turns in to face me. Now we start framing in the usual fashion. Our knees come in, and as a result, we're in perfect position to start going on the attack. Let's have a look at that again. From the situation where Matthias is on top, in a side position, and he sits through. Once he takes a sit-through position like this, it's pretty clear what his intention is. He wants to get into the mounted position. As he steps across, I hear his foot land on the far side. Now I know his knee is starting to drive towards the mat. I bring my knee close to his ankle, just like so. And now it's very easy for me to reach over the top and capture my training partner's ankle and then the knee. Now, if Matthias was naive and just stayed in this position, there's no reason why I can't start move around towards his back. So it's very much in his interest to move his head back and away from me and start to recover position. And that's going to make it very easy for me to complete my elbow escape, and now we can go to work. Let's have a look at it one more time. Matthias is in the side position, and he elects to sit through. That should warn me that he's interested in a step-over method of mounting. As he goes into the mounted position, I feel his weight distribution starting to change. Look how my knee penetrates underneath the ankle. That's going to make it easy for me to go across and capture, then the knee follows. Now Mateus has to face me, otherwise there's a lot of back exposure there. And now we start the action of coming up without elbow escape. This is another great way for us to take a dynamic situation where my opponent's moving into the mounted position, take advantage of changing weight distribution, capture our opponent's legs, and successfully complete the elbow escape. Now, we've been looking at getting out of the mounted position, and we've seen a ton of details to get this to work against resistance. Let's start putting things all together so that we can take all these myriad details we've been looking at and putting them into a narrative that you can follow a little more easily. Okay, the big picture is this. In all of our escapes that I'm going to be coaching through this video series, the big picture is simple. The whole idea of a pin is based around the idea of wedges around your hips and head, which are reinforced by your opponent's body weight. Our task is to start moving his body weight so that we can weaken the positioning of the wedges and then get inside the wedges. That's always our goal. Once we get more of our body inside his wedges than he has inside of ours, then we can start fruitfully getting positive escapes where I can put him back in a full guard and start going into offense from bottom position. That's always our big picture. Now, we're looking first at the mounted position, one of the toughest positions to get out of. We've seen that there's basically two main situations in which we find ourselves. There are static situations where our opponent gets mounted on us and he's just stuck like a clam on top of us and you've got to get him off. There's also dynamic situations where your opponent is maneuvering his way into the mount and we can take advantage of his movements to put him back in guard. The general rule of thumb is this. If your opponent has any skills and he's in a static mounted situation, he's not going to give you his feet for free. So I generally recommend knee-centered elbow escapes. These involve a particular kind of body motion, which we're referring to as a rising shrimp, where it begins with a bridge and I invert my knee down to the floor. I form a frame with a primary and a secondary hand, and I use either my hand or my elbow to put his knee, or my knee, inside his and start the action of trapping his knee. We've seen that every elbow escape from the mounted position involves the trapping of my opponent's knee on one side of his body. Only when I've trapped the knee can I successfully turn to the other side and complete the elbow escape. In dynamic situations where my opponent is maneuvering his way into the mount, I generally favor trapping my opponent's ankle first. In these situations, we get to an ankle, we lock a triangle around it, we take his knee off the mat and capture the knee. So it's a two-stage method, ankle first, knee second. Then from there we complete the elbow escape in the regular fashion. So we've got essentially knee-centered methods and ankle-centered methods. One in a dynamic situation, one in a static situation. Let's quickly run you through some examples now in order to illustrate the general principles we've been looking at. So we've got Mateus, who's across my side. And from here, as we're grappling down on the floor, I feel him starting to bring his knee across my stomach. And from here, I start the action of turning away as Mateus works his way into the mounted position. I block his knee with my elbow, we lock up, and I've trapped an ankle. Our whole goal is to trap a knee, however. So from here, we force his knee inside our legs. Then, from that position, I can start the action of turning and facing my opponent. Now he's back in a guard position. Okay. Alternatively, if Mateus is on top and he's got his elbow across and I see him sitting through in the situation, as he steps his foot across my body, his body weight starts to change in weight distribution. As he comes into the mounted position, I capture his ankle on this side, and then from here, we're back in a situation where we can easily get our mounted elbow escape working. Then we switch to static situations where Mateus has actually achieved the mounted position. If Mateus is naive and has no real skills and his feet are far apart, there's no reason why we can't just start going in and trapping an ankle. Just like so. We go to the ankle first, then we capture the knee, and then we come back in the opposite direction to actually physically put this man back in guard. Now, if Mateus is perhaps a little naive, but not too bad, and his ankles are relatively close together, in these situations I might go hunting for an ankle. I might use my feet to separate my training partner's ankles apart, and as a result we can use those ankle-based methods to trap an ankle, elevate it, finish on the knee, and then from this position start putting our training partner back in guard again. But really, realistically, if you're finding someone who's worth their salt, they're not going to offer you any feet for free. They're going to be locked in very, very tight. And so my favorite method of working in these situations is to form a two-armed frame where we have a secondary arm and a primary arm. The elbow of the primary goes inside the knee. The elbow of the secondary goes outside the hip. We never let the elbow start drifting towards the center line. Always want the elbow of the secondary outside the hip. Elbow of the primary goes inside the knee. Those are always our elbow positions. Now, if my opponent locks onto me, say for example with a headlock, in like so, we start that action of shrimping by bridging up on our side, and then from here I shrimp my hips out. As my knee inverts, we can use any manner of mechanical tricks to bring our knee inside his knee like so. Now as he puts weight down on us in situations like this, it's not a difficult thing for us. Start completing an elbow escape and putting him back in guard. In this way, we have a program for the mounted position based around elbow escaping. Of course, I always recommend backing it up with bridging escapes as well. Bridging escapes, even though they don't have a particularly impressive success rate in international competition, are important in a beginner's class for several reasons. First, they work very well on people who aren't very skilled with their weight distribution, and a lot of people in a beginner's class aren't. Secondly, as you get better and better opponents who are skilled with their weight distribution, you can move your opponent's body weight and force them to base out. And as a result, you can start hitting good elbow escapes. So if we have a talented opponent on top of us and we've successfully trapped an arm in just like so, I will physically go to bridge and move, and I see my opponent pushing out with his legs for base, and now from here it's an easy thing for me to start bringing my knees inside my training partner's legs. And from here, not a difficult thing for us to start finishing our elbow escapes in the usual fashion. And so the true value, as you get more and more expertise in the sport of jiu-jitsu, of the bridging escapes tends to be more as a setup, a means of moving my opponent's body weight so that we can enter into our elbow escapes. But the combination of those two, bridging escapes and the elbow escape, with a special emphasis on elbow escapes, is going to be your best bet for developing cast iron defense to the mounted position and getting you out of that position and back on the attack. Let's go over some additional material now on problems associated with escaping from mounted position. I'm actually joined by my good friend Sean Williams for this. We taught a beginner's class together back in 1999, 2000, and the old gang is getting together again for BJJ Fanatics. One of the big problems associated with escaping from mounted position is the use of your training partner's feet. A big part of your opponent's connection to your body is through the use of his feet, because it's his feet which lock the wedges around your hips. Okay, so if we can fight our opponent's feet successfully, that's going to greatly facilitate our escapes from mounted position. Let's look first at what the problems are. There's different ways this problem can be expressed. If Sean Williams is mounted on top of me, his feet can work in various kinds of ways to solidify the wedges of his knees around my hips. Some people will have their feet close together. Some people will go the extra distance and actually cross their feet. And some people will grapevine their feet into your legs. Okay? Whenever this occurs, this can complicate your escape from the mounted position. Grapevines, for example, can complicate your attempts to bridge your way out. Even if I trap Sean Williams' arm and lock it in, when he's grapevined in sufficiently strongly, when I go to bridge, he's connected into my legs, and as a result, my bridge gets subverted. Okay? This can be a real problem. When Sean Williams goes to lock his feet tight together, this becomes a big problem whenever we go into elbow escapes. It's very difficult for me now to access my training partner's feet to get traditional elbow escapes to work. It can even be difficult to bring my knee inside, the form of elbow escape that we favor. And so learning to fight your opponent's feet is a big, big part of getting out of the mounted position. We're going to look first
at the idea of grapevines. This is a very common problem that many people run into problems with. The feet lock in and they hook into our ankles like so. And this strongly negates my ability to bridge effectively from bottom position. So what should we do whenever we're in a tight grapevine? Your opponent will want to flare and hook his feet in to maximize his grip upon your legs. Understand that as long as he does so, it's very difficult for me just to kick out in straight lines. What we need to do is to turn our toes in the same direction his toes are pointing. Okay, if there's a discrepancy in angle, lock in tight short, it's difficult for me just to get away. It feels like he's hooked in. Those hooks are very sticky. So what we want to do is turn our feet so the toes point in the same direction and extend out to the side, and that will easily get our foot out on one side of the body. Once we've escaped one side, we take the second foot, we stand on top of the heel, and we easily extract. Now we place our feet in the inside position, okay? When we get the inside position, we put a foot down straight. So when Sean tries to reattach the grapevines, my feet are no longer available. Remember, in order to get grapevines in, his feet have to go inside mine. As a result, he's now hooked in successfully. But when we turn out to an angle and extend out to the side, we brush easily away from his grapevines. We pommel our foot on top of his heel, pressure down, and escape. Now we take the inside position. Our feet are inside his and we have an extended leg. So when he tries to hook in a second time, it's very difficult indeed. And now we can go into our various forms of escape. So this is one simple way to deal with the problem of grapevines. When we see someone who has locked their feet tight in here, now it's a different kind of problem. Now we need to untangle their feet. So how are we going to do this? We're going to take our foot and place the heel of our foot on top of our training partner's heel. We're going to push out and away to the side and unlock the feet. Now there's a danger he's simply going to bring his feet back in and relock them. We don't want that. You don't have to repeat the same work twice. So when we see our opponent locks his feet tight, we take our feet and find his and press them apart like so. Once we get that pressure apart, we now take our leg and extend the leg straight between his legs. So when he tries to bring his feet back together, it's a difficult thing. And now from here, we'll be able to find our knee inside our opponent's knee. If my opponent has locked his feet all the way underneath me, like so, the onus is on us to put hands on the hips and shimmy past his feet, like so. And then we repeat the process, clearing our training partner's legs out of the way and going back to a position where our leg is flat along the floor. The other foot is up close to our buttocks, so when he tries to relock his feet underneath us, it's difficult. The only way he can lock feet are when my two knees are off the mat and my heels are away from my buttocks. So the onus is on us, once we've found our training partner's feet and separated them, to get knee down to the floor and foot close to the buttocks. Now when he tries either to grapevine or to hook his feet together, it's impossible. Remember, grapevining requires that my two soles of my feet be on the floor and that my two knees be relatively bent. Once we separate and we go to this position here, one extended leg and one foot flat on the floor with the heel very close to the buttocks, it becomes impossible for him either to cross his feet or to grapevine my legs. And now we can start going into our characteristic escapes from this position.
Now, we just looked at the basic concept of foot fighting from the bottom of the mounted position. Let's go further now and start talking about the goal of foot fighting. One thing we always want to avoid in Jiu-Jitsu is getting into fights without a purpose. Every time you get into some kind of physical confrontation, there has to be a guiding purpose, a goal towards which you're fighting. Otherwise, it just turns into a meaningless dogfight with no sense of direction. Whenever we're engaged in a foot fight from the bottom of the mounted position, we have a definite sense of purpose, of goal, and that is the so-called long, short position. What is this? My opponent's mounted. We know that a big part of his connection to me overall from the mounted position is going to be through his feet, and he has the choice of grapevines, which is typically used against bridging, or his feet together, locked, or just touching, which is typically a defense against elbow escape variations.
Whenever someone goes for either of these options, we want to use our foot fighting as a method of preventing him from connecting to us in this fashion. It's going to greatly facilitate our escapes from mounted position. Now, if I fight my opponent's feet, if I fight my opponent's feet and get them apart in this sense, I don't want to have situations where he just relocks them and we end up right back where we were. If he has grapevines on me and I turn out of a grapevine, I don't want him just grapevining me a second time. This is not what we're looking for. So ultimately what we're going to look for is a very interesting position, very simple position, but an important one. And this is the long short position, where one of my legs goes long and turns outwards, and one of my legs goes short and the foot comes all the way up to the buttocks like so. So my heel is up to my butt. Now, when my opponent goes for any kind of hold with his feet, whether it be grapevines or locked feet, it's very, very difficult. And at the same time, it greatly facilitates my ability to bring legs along the mat and start to generate escapes. If I do decide to switch to a bridge, let's say, for example, I trap an arm, then I can go quickly enough from this position into a bridge that he won't have time to hook in and make his grapevines and stop the bridge. So always, when we're engaged in a foot fight, our goal and purpose is very simple and very direct. First, we've got to get rid of the connection of his feet. If it's grapevines, it's done by turning, pommeling, and going to this position, the long short position. If my opponent hooks in, then we have to find his feet with our feet. That takes some degree of dexterity on your part, nothing crazy, but some. And then from here, we push them apart, we get our foot on the inside, and we go back to the long short position. Now, when he tries to recross his feet, it's impossible. When he tries to switch to grapevines, it's impossible. And then, once again, from here, we have great ability to go into the various forms of escape that we favor from mounted position. So let's understand this very clearly. When someone gets mounted on us, a big part of their ability to connect successfully to us is through their feet. The two main options will be grapevining and locking the feet in like so. We need to be able to first untangle their feet. If it's grapevines, it's typically done by a turnout followed by a pommel. And then we go long short. When my opponent tries to go back into my legs, it's impossible. Okay? And from here, a relatively simple thing for us to go into our various escapes. If my opponent begins with crossed feet, it's important I be able to find his heels. Here, Sean Williams has a particular lock of his feet. You can see that my right foot is having a hard time finding his heel. That tells me the left foot will be the appropriate one. Okay, you have to do some experimenting there with your feet to find the correct side to push. Now, we get our foot inside, we go back down, and we find ourselves back in that long, short position. When he tries to relock his feet, it's very, very difficult and relatively simple for us now to go into our elbow escapes. I'm going to do the same thing, but with a change in angle so you can see our feet more clearly. Now, as Sean Williams locks his feet in here, locked feet, we need to be able to uncross those feet. If I try my right foot, I physically cannot see his feet right now, so I have to do this by feel. I take my foot and I find I'm having a hard time with my right foot. So I switch and left foot finds his heel very, very easily. And as a result, we can quickly pass our foot to the inside position. Now, I go long leg, short leg. He tries to thread his legs back in and make control. Very, very difficult indeed. And relatively simple for us now to start brushing through and going into our various elbow escapes. So once again, you will see that whenever your opponent crosses his feet, you will have a top heel and a bottom heel. Our goal is to find the top heel. I can't physically see it with my eyes, so I must feel it with my feet. There has to be a certain sense of feeling on your part here. Here, my right foot is not cutting it. When I push, nothing's happening. So I go across the other side and find that my left foot goes against his left foot. Okay, it's Sean switches the grip of his feet. Now my right foot must find his right foot, and I will be able to separate quite easily. Okay, we cannot go across. Here, I feel for the foot. It's left on left. That's what we're looking for. Left on left breaks the grip. Switch feet short. From here, left on right doesn't work. So we have to go right on right. And then from here, you can quickly get back inside
hit the elbow escape we're looking for. Seen in this way, you can see that it's a fairly simple business to separate your training partner's feet, to win a foot fight, not just by untangling his feet, but by untangling his feet and then getting to a position, the long leg, short leg, where he can't re-entangle back into you. In this way, you win a battle, you have a sense of direction, you know what victory looks like, untangling his feet, and getting to this long leg, short leg position where he can't simply repeat the same process and hold the mount for long periods of time. Now, another common problem associated with escaping from the mounted position is the problem of distance. Very often, when you have a skilled opponent on top, he will be looking to go from a situation where he's wedged in position over your hips to one where he comes to what is often described as a high mount, whereas his wedges start coming up towards your diaphragm and chest. This is often a prelude to strangleholds and arm lock attacks, and it also creates some pretty obvious problems when we go for our standard escapes from mounted position. Let's have a look at the problem itself and then start looking at some solutions. Okay, Sean Williams has done a good job getting to the mounted position, and you'll notice that normally when things start off, it's kind of hip to hip. His hips are over my hips. But very often you'll have an opponent who walks his knees up towards your armpits, okay? And this creates new problems. First, it's much easier for Sean to access my neck and go into strangleholds. Secondly, it's very easy for him to make a turn around my shoulder line and start threatening arm locks from this position. And then a bad situation just gets worse and worse. Okay? Not only is it bad in terms of his offense, it's also terrible news for me as someone interested in getting out of this position. Because now I find it enormously difficult to access his feet to get any kind of elbow escape action going. Interestingly, the higher Sean comes up on me, the less effective my bridges become, because bridging is contingent upon the idea of my hips being underneath my opponent's hips. Now, when I go to bridge, he's so high up on me, he barely feels my bridge. Okay, so it's very, very destructive, not only in terms of his ability to attack me, but my ability to defend myself and get out of here. So it's very much in our interest to keep our opponent down the body. Let's have a look at how we can stop someone from getting up into a high mount. One of the first things we always want to get into a habit of is getting a frame across our training partner's body like so. So that when we lock up our hands here, we've got a bar. When Sean Williams tries to come up the body now, that's a very difficult thing, and that will stop him in his tracks. Okay? So it's a good general habit when someone gets into the mounted position to take one of our hands, give a small bump, and get our hand across. Okay? If we don't give a bump, it can be quite difficult to get a hand across when he's powering down with his hips and you feel like, I can never get my hand inside. So very often here it's a good idea just to give a quick bump and the hand goes through quite easily. Okay? Now, once we've got that forearm across and our hands locked, when Sean Williams tries to come forward up into a high mount, there's a lot of resistance. Okay, it's more or less impossible. And from here, we can start to control the distance and go into the various forms of escape that we favor. Now, an obvious question is, okay, well, wait a minute. What if I'm a day late and a dollar short and the guy does get to the high mount? How do I recover from here? Okay. Well, first of all, notice that bridging is pretty much ineffective at this point because he's so far over your hips. So to bring his hands back down to the mat, we need to put a knee in the center of his spine and bring him forward like so. Now I put the forearm across and I lock my hands in. We are now going to engage in shoulder walking. Even if my opponent has his feet locked underneath my body here, we're going to walk backwards on our shoulders and shimmy down the mat and put him back in a position where we can go to work. Once we get into a conventional situation where his hips are over our hips, now we go for our conventional escapes. All the same escapes that we saw before will now work as we saw them. The conventional escapes that we saw will be very problematic the moment your opponent's hips go from above your hips to above your sternum and chest. Now it's a serious problem. It's going to be very difficult for me to hit bridging escapes and even more difficult to hit elbow escapes. You can see I can't even form effective frames here. I can't even get my elbow inside his knee. This is a serious problem. That's why we put the hand across, coming down tight now, Sean.
and we start walking backwards on our shoulders, kind of a shimmying sidewinder-like motion. I'm just going to do that motion one time solo so you can see what it looks like. It looks like I'm trumping, but really I'm not. What's involved here is a frame. I lift my hips and I sidewinder from one shoulder to the other. It is not a movement of my hips so much as it's a movement of my shoulders. The power of the move actually doesn't come from the shoulders. It comes from your hips being off the floor so that your legs are pushing you. Now, the friction with the mat prevents my body from moving here. But when I take a shoulder off the floor and move, the friction is gone. And as a result, we move and we put the guy back down our body. So let's have a look at this again. Shawn Williams is mounted. He does a good job of coming up high. First things first, we bring the hand across. Second thing, we lock it in place. Hands down on the floor now, Shawn. Shawn takes a strong mounted position, and we are going to now take our hips off the mat, and we're going to walk shoulder to shoulder until we can shimmy down to a position where he's locked back in a more conventional mount. Now from here we know what to do. So he takes a crossface, locks in a tight mounted position. We start with our single shoulder bridge, and then end up back in the safety of guard position. This is an easy way to deal with that very common problem of a high mounted position. Now we're starting to go through some troubleshooting for your escapes from bottom mounted position. One of the greatest sources of trouble in escaping from the mounted position is the problem of back exposure. Always remember that the link between mounted position and rear mounted position is a very close one. If I turn or over rotate to a degree where my elbow passes my training partner's center line, you can run into a lot of problems when you're trying to escape from mount by exposing your back to your opponent and making a bad situation much worse. Let's have a look first at what the problem is, and then look at ways to make sure that it doesn't occur in your case. So, Shawn Williams is mounted on me. I'm going to escape in this direction to my left, so let's use my right elbow as the yardstick of how much back exposure I generate when I go to escape. How many times have you been watching a mixed martial arts match, someone will get in the mounted position and the guy on bottom will panic, turn, and start to expose his back to his opponent, okay? It's very prevalent in mixed martial arts because of the danger of punches, okay? It's less prevalent in the sport of jiu-jitsu because we don't have to deal with punches, but it's still there, okay? The problem occurs when my elbow starts to pass Shawn Williams' center line, okay? Let's use Shawn Williams' center line as the yardstick. When my elbow passes that center line, you are now in the realm of back exposure. Your opponent can help that process by shucking your elbow by and making things even worse. By the time your right elbow goes in line with your opponent's right hip, or vice versa, left elbow to left hip, you have now exposed your back to your opponent, and you have turned a bad situation into a crisis situation. It's a crisis for two reasons. First, there's a tremendous exposure of my arm to arm lock attacks. Shawn Williams rotates around my shoulder line. It's only a matter of time now until he steps into Jujigatami or any other form of arm lock attack he favors. Even worse, once my elbow goes in this direction, he can start to access my collars. And from here, the strangles come on very, very quickly indeed. This is a serious, serious problem. The mounted position is bad enough as it is. You don't want to make it any worse by exposing your back. Now, how can we use this knowledge of the relationship between our elbow and our training partner's center line and hip to safeguard this? Well, you probably guessed already. Our whole goal is to ensure that our elbow never goes past the center line, and certainly never gets close to going right elbow to right hip. Our whole goal is to keep our elbow, in this case my right elbow, on our opponent's left hip. Anytime I start going beyond that mark, bad things start to happen. So let's be sure that when someone gets in the mounted position, we keep our elbows disciplined and right elbow stays on left hip and vice versa. Even as Sean Williams gets a tight headlock, puts his arm out wide at the base, locks his feet in tight, you will see in these situations, when I go into my escapes, my right elbow, still visible on the camera, never loses position. And as a result, even though I did turn and my back came off the ground, no part of my back was exposed to my opponent in the course of the elbow escape. This is a super important theme. Once again, when we form our frames, you must be defensively responsible with your elbow positions. And there's a clear demarcation line that you can easily obey. My right elbow locks into the left hip. The good news is it's actually rather easy to do when your opponent is in the most common forms of mounted position, which involve a cross-face grip like so. If your opponent sits up straight, you will not be able to generate the same kind of locking into your opponent's hip anymore. And I often recommend in these situations, we use our hands and our training partner's hips as a substitute and bump him down to the floor as he locks in with his feet. Now, I keep my elbows so far outside his hip because of my hand position that it's relatively easy for us to go into our various forms of escape from here. But because most of the time, our opponents are interested in locking down chest to chest and they work with a crossface, most of the time, that will be our frame that we work with. Now, Sean Williams holds on to a tight mounted position, everything in close and tight. We know now that if our elbow stays in good position, we can elbow escape without fear of back explosion. If our opponent's more upright, then we can perform similar actions with our hands in the hips. His feet lock in tight. And again, we elbow escape without back explosion. Using this simple rule of the relationship between your elbow and your opponent's hips and center line, you can make sure that the risk of back exposure as you go to escape is minimized.
Okay, it's time for us to switch topics now. We've looked at escaping from the mounted position. Let's look now at escaping from side pins. I'm going to start off with a statement here. When you first start off the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you are going to spend more time in the bottom of side control getting pinned than probably all the other pins put together. It's by far and away statistically the most common pin at all levels of the sport, all the way up to world championship level. More people get held down and frustrated in side control than all the other pins put together, as I said. It's absolutely critical that we have a strong method of getting out of side pins and back on the attack. One thing doesn't change. It's always our general methodology. Our general methodology, as we've said before, is to create movement in our opponent, to loosen the reinforcement of the wedges he's placed around our head and our hips. And then from there, we need to get inside our opponent's wedges. I need to get my limbs inside his limbs. That's always the battle. It comes down to that. Can you get your limbs inside his? When I say get limbs inside, sometimes it'll be hands, sometimes it'll be elbows, sometimes it'll be shoulders, sometimes it'll be knees, sometimes it'll be ankles. But something has got to get inside his limbs. There's going to come a point where you start getting more and more points of your limbs inside more and more points of his limbs. Once you get to a certain critical point, you're going to be able to put him back in guard pretty readily. There are other forms of escape from side position. We'll be looking at them too. But there's no question, as always, the dominant form of escape in Jiu-Jitsu always has been and always will be variations of the elbow escape, where I ultimately end up putting my opponent back in guard. Let's have a look at variations of the elbow escape from side pin situations and teach them in light of our general theory of escapes, the idea of generating movement in our opponent and getting our limbs inside his wedges. Okay, we're going to have Mateus start off across my side. From the situation, the first thing I'm going to assess when it's time to get out, I will ask myself, how is Mateus holding me? What kind of problem is he presenting to me? You can clearly see that he has a crossface here. He also has an underhook on the far side. This is one kind of side pin. It's one of many. He might, for example, take his arm across here and apply a reverse cross face, and then post his hand down here by my hip. Now he's presenting a different problem to me. It's one thing to escape from one kind of pin, it's quite a different thing to escape from another. Then he might choose to sit through down onto his hip. Now it's a different kind of pin again. Then he might come back up to his knees, put an arm underneath my arm, grab my elbow, and then sit through in the other direction. And this too is a different form of pin. You can see in a very short space of time, Mateus has gone through 4 different pins, and each one of those pins requires a different response on my part. There is, however, no doubt that probably the most common form of pin in the sport of jiu-jitsu is this one here, the top head and arm, where my opponent has trapped my arm with an underhook on the far side, has a crossface here, and has either locked his hands or, in some cases, utilized my gi and locked it up like so. Okay? We're going to look at the basic case of locked hands first, since that's probably the most common form of side pin that we deal with in the sport. In a situation like this, let's start off by understanding that Mateus currently owns all the inside real estate. His knee is inside my arm. His right knee is inside my hip. His shoulder is inside my shoulder. His head is inside my opposite shoulder, and his underhook is inside and underneath my left arm. So I have literally no limbs inside him. Okay? As a result, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to escape. So the first thing we've got to start doing is generating a little bit of motion so that I can get this, the near side elbow, inside my opponent's hip. Here's a general word of advice for you. Most of the elbow escapes from the side position begin with the placement of this elbow inside his hip. You can clearly see that I can't currently get the elbow inside. Mateus is too tight to me. So how am I going to get my elbow in this side? I'm going to do it by turning in what seems to be the wrong direction. I'm going to shift my feet and hips so that I can generate motion in this direction and get my elbow inside. Once again, if Mateus is sufficiently tight in his body positioning, I can't get my right elbow inside and form my first frame. I can't get my first instance of inside limb positioning. So I'm going to start by turning my body away from my opponent. And as a result, my elbow goes in very, very easily. Now, how I place my near side frame is very important. Don't go in too far with your forearm, all the way down here. Now, Mateus can manipulate my arm position very easily by sitting on top of my arm and crushing it. Don't go out too far with your elbow out here. Now Mateus could seize my elbow, pull it, and extend it out of position. I've lost it again. The ideal point to place your arm is about halfway down the forearm, right in the bone of your chinny partner's hip. Once we've done this, you've got your first act of inside positioning. It's not much, but it's a good start. My whole goal now is to increase the number of my limbs inside his. Okay? Now, from here, I want to get my knee inside, but as Mateus holds me tight and drives with the crossface, it can be a difficult thing for me to achieve. So the first thing I'm going to do is try to move Mateus's head from my left side to my right side. I'll explain soon why that's a very significant thing. The way we're going to do this is we're going to bridge into our opponent. I don't bridge up, that doesn't move Mateus. Instead, I'm going to bridge across as we always do by having one foot flat and the other foot turned outwards on my toes. I'm going to use a bicep crossface to move Mateus's head from my left side to my right side. And as a result, it's very easy for me now to shoot my hips out and bring my knee inside. Once my knee goes inside Mateus's knee, you're starting to look a lot better. I now have an elbow inside his knee and a knee inside his knee. We've got 2 items of inside body positioning. There's no reason now why I can't start the action of now bringing a knee inside his hip. Now I've got 3 examples of inside body positioning. My elbow is inside his knee, my knee is inside his hip, and from here we're in a position where we can start to go to work. I've got his knee trapped on this side, So we've made a strong start. Now all I need to do is shift my hips all the way out like so. And as a result, it's very easy for us now to lock up a guard and find ourselves in a good attacking position from bottom. Once again, let's change the angle on this. From a situation where Mateus is across my side, you can see he's locked his hands. He's got his head in good inside position inside the shoulder. He's underneath and inside my left arm. He's wedged out my right elbow, and his right knee is inside my hip. So I have no means of no items of inside positioning here. He could hold me all night like this. So I'm going to start by moving my body in what appears to be the wrong direction so that I can get my elbow inside his hip. I position my forearm about halfway up its length, right there on the hip. Now from here, I start the action of bridging to move Mateus's head. Now I throw my hips out and my knee goes inside his knee. With my knee in the inside position, my elbow in the inside position, now it's not a difficult thing for us to bring our knee inside his hip. Now we engage in that serpentine motion that we use so often to shift our hips out to the side and return into a guard position. This kind of movement, focused on first attaining inside limb position, usually one item at a time, until we build up enough inside positioning that we can move our body weight underneath our opponent, is always the story of escape from side pins via elbow escape. We're going to look at many variations of this critical move. Time spent in this critical part of the game will be of tremendous service to you in your fundamental years in the sport of jiu-jitsu. Let's talk a little bit about some basic theory and conceptual elements of getting pinned across side. Let's give a fundamental definition of what it is to be pinned across side, because it's going to help you a lot when it's time to get out. The only way I can be considered as pinning my opponent across side is for one fundamental concept to be in place. Test, slide down. Every side pin has a fundamental element inside of it. It requires that my head be on one side of my opponent's body and my hips be on the other. If my head and my hips are on the same side of the body, it's almost impossible for my opponent to be pinned. He can easily just shift out and put me back in guard. The only way I can effectively pin people across side, regardless of the type of pin, is where my hips are on one side of his body and my head is on the other. Now he's pinned. But if Mateus was strong enough to simply push my head from one side to the other, I now have no body weight effectively on top of him. And so Mateus can easily move and put me back in guard. So once you understand this fundamental concept about side position, that it requires that the hips be on one side of the body and the head be on the other, that's going to open up a lot of illumination as to how we're going to get out of this position. With that in mind, let's start looking at that right now. Okay, Mateus is on top of me in a side pin. You can clearly see that Mateus's head is on my left side and his hips are on my right side. In any situation like this, if I'm able to move Mateus's head to the same side as his hips, this will greatly facilitate my escapes. So one of the first things I like to do whenever I'm in any kind of pin from a cross side is to move the head. The only way I can move the head is by bridging. You will not be able to move it merely by pushing with your arms. What's involved here is my legs and moving the head across. You can clearly see now that Mateus's head is on the same side as his hips. And as a result, it's extremely easy for me to employ my legs to hit effective elbow escapes. So one of the big targets for any master of side control escapes is always your opponent's head. I'm always looking for effective ways to move the head. The good news is, there's lots of effective ways. The two most common methods we use are bicep cross faces and forearm cross faces. In a forearm cross face, my hand goes here on my training partner's shoulder. And my intention from here is to engage in that same bridging action and move my opponent's head, so that Mateus's head moves to the same side of my body as his hips. And as a result, it's very easy for me to get the inside position. And from here, we put this man back in guard position. If I cannot attain a forearm crossface and my arm is shut out, then in these situations, we will employ a bicep crossface, where I take my bicep, I don't hold my opponent by the head, I'm not headlocking him, that's not what we want. From here, look how my arm straightens and I move Mateus's head by pointing and reaching. And then from here, it's relatively easy for us to complete that elbow escape. Learning to move our opponent's head to the same side as his hips dramatically increases the ease with which you can enter into your opponent's legs and employ a successful elbow escape. I always ask my students, whenever they can, attack the head, move the head to the same side as the hips, and everything gets easier. You can't always do it, but when you can, it's a wonderful thing. Now, I want to go over some fine details of the side elbow escape that make a real difference when it's time to work against strongly resisting opponents. The first element has a dreadful name, I'm sorry, penetration points. It's very, very important that when you go to penetrate with your limbs to get inside his limbs, you do so at the most efficient target points. And this often throws beginning students off. Okay, Mateus is across my side. You'll notice that his right knee is right there in my hip. So often I see young athletes trying to work by bringing their knee along the floor to reclaim the guard position. And you can see what's happening. My knee is getting blocked out by Mateus's knee because his knee is inside position. His position is inside my hip and inside my knee. So when I bring my knee across the floor, I simply can't get inside his knee and complete an elbow escape. Okay? This is such a common error. Even if players don't bring their knee across the floor, they still bring it too low. And as a result, they run into their opponent's thigh. And I see all day people trying to bring their knee in and experiencing failure. Understand something. The proper place to insert your knee and penetrate inside your opponent's thigh is here at the hip. That's the best place for me to work. The moment you start trying to go below the hip, you run into the thigh or the knee, and his inside positioning beats you every single time. The best place for me to gain inside position is to take the point of my knee and put it in the pocket of his hip. Now, I'm going to move out shrimping. For every inch that I move out, my knee moves in an inch. Once my knee takes the inside position, look how I bring it down inside Mateus's knee until my knee is inside his knee. That's what I'm looking for. Once my knee takes the inside position, it's so easy for me to draw him around and lock up the leg. And then from here, we know the story. Once we have one knee, we always go across to the other side and complete the elbow escape. Something interesting is happening with my frame underneath you, so I'm going to demonstrate this solo. When I bring my knee in, my knee inverts and points down towards the floor. If my knee is higher than my foot, I can never get my knee inside. I have to create conditions where my foot is higher than my knee. And at the same time, with my frame arm, my hand is higher than my elbow. And as a result, my elbow and my knee meet in front of Mateus and they form a V shape. That V shape enables me to push off Mateus and reclaim guard position. Okay, so let's have a look at this in detail. Mateus is across my side and locked up. First things first, we always get our elbow frame inside first. Then I find the appropriate point of penetration right there at the hip. I position my foot higher than my knee, and for every inch that I move out, my knee moves inside an inch. As a result, I can now take my knee inside. You will notice, if you sit up now, Matthias, that I have formed this V shape, which follows the contours of Matthias's hips. It forms a V, which locks onto the left hip, and this side of the V locks onto his right hip. So when Matthias tries to drive back into me, I can easily hold him off with that V-shaped frame. And this makes it very easy now to go down and capture the knee. Once we capture the knee, we capture the hip on the far side, and we easily put our training partner back in guard. Let's have a look at this critical concept from a variety of angles. From here, you can clearly see I begin, as always, by turning my elbow inside and forming my initial frame. Then I position my knee at the point of the hip and I make my foot go higher than my knee. For every inch that I move out, I now have an ability to slide my knee in. Now, my knee goes inside his, and it's such an easy thing now to draw him around with our knee. We capture the leg. There's the second act of elbow escaping. We move our hips out to the side with that serpentine motion that we value so much. And from here, we're in the perfect position now to go on the offense. From another angle. The elbow goes in. I set my knee and position my foot higher than my knee, so that every time I go to move out, I now get an ability to move my knee inside his. Once we capture the leg at the knee, now I can go across to the other side. My elbow goes inside his knee, my knee captures his hip. We move all the way around the corner and we lock up our training partner's guard, and we're in a position now to go on the attack. This idea of inserting our limbs at the appropriate points so we can penetrate to the inside position is absolutely key to getting out of the side position. Proper use of these insertion points dramatically lowers the amount of effort you have to use to escape from these troublesome pins. In addition, the use of that V-shaped frame enables us to control the movements of strong, heavy pinners and put them back in guard. If there's one common complaint that I get when it's time to coach escaping from side pins, it's this: how do you deal with a strong crossface? So many times athletes come to me and say, I can drill these moves, I can do them well when I drill, but the moment I go live with an opponent, they just lock on a devilishly strong crossface and I can't even breathe, forget about actually put the guy back in guard. And I feel my neck's being cranked, it's so uncomfortable, and I can't turn into them to put my opponent back in guard. What should I do? Okay. First off, understand the crossface is a problem for all of us. Okay. No matter what level you're at, crossface is always something we struggle to work against. Nonetheless, there's still some good practical things we can do to bring the crossface down to manageable levels so we can start to hit an effective elbow escape, put that guy back in guard. First, let's have a look at the problem. Okay, the problem is my opponent gets across side and he comes in here, he puts his hands underneath my armpit and drives his shoulder along the line of my jaw so that my head is forced to look in this direction. Now understand something, my elbow escape needs me to go in this direction. That's why this crossface is such a pain in the butt, because he's driving me in the exact opposite direction I need to go in order to initiate my elbow escape. It doesn't help that I have my frame arm inside his hip. That won't stop him from driving across the jaw in this fashion. Now, as Matthias goes to apply pressure, you will hear my voice change. He's compressing my vocal cords, okay? And as a result, it's difficult for me even to talk to you. In fact, done properly, a crossface in this position can even have a strangulation effect. And in extreme cases, you can even put someone to sleep with a good crossface. Usually it's not quite that extreme, but it definitely can happen, and it can definitely make it much, much harder for you to get your escapes going. So what should I be doing in these situations where someone is making my life miserable with a crossface and preventing me from getting any kind of escape? My elbow escape is designed to go to my right, but my opponent's crossface pressure is forcing my head to the left. Okay, what should I be looking to do in these situations? As Mateus goes to apply his crossface pressure, if my hips are static, you will see it's very, very hard for me to do anything but suffer in this position. So as Mateus locks tight and drives in with the head, what we're going to do is we're going to start walking our hips away from our opponent's hips. Now he's forced to go to follow me. And the act of following, he has to relieve the crossface pressure. There's no way to walk without relieving the pressure. So as he drives his shoulder into me, he's static when he does the drive. But as I go to walk and he goes to follow, the pressure gets alleviated to some degree. And then in one motion, we're going to start the action of inserting our knee right there at the hip in the correct point. And as a result, we're able to capture the inside of our training partner's knee. My knee goes to the inside. We shift our hips, and from here, we get him back in guard. There's a sense here in which I get my opponent walking towards me, and then I change direction and insert my knee before he can react. This is an effective way of alleviating some of the pressure of a strong crossface. So once again, Mateus pins me across my side. I have my forearm in place. As he goes to put a heavy crossface pressure, you'll hear my voice changing. I start the action of walking away from him. If he doesn't follow me, there's no reason I can't put him back in guard, even with the crossface. Okay? So he has to follow me. As he goes to follow me, the pressure starts to alleviate. Why? Because the action of walking means he can't focus on that shoulder. Now, as he's walking to his right, and I'm moving away, I just change direction right there at the hip. Now as he tries to get away from me, we've already formed a V frame, and as a result, it's too late. From here, we elbow escape and put him back in guard. That's one possible way to alleviate the effects of a crossface. Let's look at some others. Understand that the crossface is only possible if Mateus's head is down here tight to my shoulder. So what I will often do in these situations is move my training partner's head. As I see my opponent putting on strong crossface pressure, it's hard for me just to move his head in this direction. So what I will often do under these circumstances, he goes in to apply pressure, I will put my forearm in place, and in one motion I'll start bridging into him with my hips. As I feel him applying his crossface pressure, I'm going to switch direction, not with the intention of putting him over, but just with the intention of making him do that, basing out. Let's look at what happens if he doesn't base out. As he puts pressure on me in this situation, I straighten out my left leg and I push in the direction my left leg is facing, and I take him over. Okay? Now, realistically, it's unlikely you're going to take a good person over with this. But what you will do is you'll get a reaction. So he goes into drive, I push into him, and then I switch my legs, and he bases out. That immediately creates a situation where I can get my legs back in and start to elbow escape off his reaction. Another excellent way to deal with crossface pressure, as soon as my opponent goes in and goes to apply that pressure, is for me to use my own crossface from bottom position. I'm going to shift my hips and I'm going to apply, he's got a shoulder crossface, I'm going to apply a bicep crossface. And from here, I shoot everything directly overhead. Okay? Even when he's got a very strong crossface, you can put some pressure on the face. From here, my bicep crossface is also strong. And I move his head out of the way. Now I can turn in on my opponent and put him back in guard. Essentially, we create a crossface versus crossface situation. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, he's on top. Shouldn't his crossface be stronger than your bottom crossface? No. Why? Because his crossface is a combination of a percentage of his body weight. But my bottom crossface is a big percentage of my leg strength. Okay? We're involved in the action of bridging. From here, I bridge and extend. And from this position, it's the strength of my hips and legs bridging, which moves Mateus's head. So you can clearly see Mateus is going to put on a strong crossface. You can hear my voice changing in respect to the strength of the crossface. Now from here, I start my action of moving his head. And as a result, we're back in position. Countering his top shoulder crossface with your bottom bicep crossface happens to be my favorite way of countering a strong crossface attack from on top. The other two methods work well, but when push comes to shove, countering with a bicep crossface from bottom with a strong bridge is always my favorite method. Now, I want to talk to you about a super important topic when it's time to hit an elbow escape from bottom side control. You've heard me talk earlier in this video about the true nature of bridging and the true nature of shrimping, and how these two movements are often misunderstood. If people used bridging and shrimping less as a warm-up before class and more as a technical study and physical excellence, they'd have a lot easier time getting out of bad pins, believe me. As I said, most people always misunderstand the bridge as in terms of the height of the bridge, rather than the attempt to displace body weight. Okay? Remember, it doesn't matter how high I bridge up if my opponent's body doesn't move side to side. I can go as high as I want. When I come back down, your opponent's still on top of you. The idea is not to move body weight up, it's to displace body weight to one side or the other. And the only way we can do this is what we call asymmetrical bridging. If my two legs are symmetrical and I bridge straight up, he's not going anywhere. It's only when I make my feet asymmetrical with a knee pointing to the side and a knee pointing up. The first leg, this is my first drive leg, the one which is flat on the floor. The foot that's flat on the floor is the first drive leg. So when I initiate a drive, I come up onto the point of my shoulder, one foot, and the ball of the other foot. Then I switch. As my right leg leaves the ground and loses power, the left foot takes over. And as a result, I'm able to get up like so. That fundamental movement is also the first part, of arguably the most important body movement in all of escapes in all of jiu-jitsu, the rising shrimp. Unfortunately, most people understand shrimping as sliding. Yes, there are sliding versions of the shrimp, and yes, they do have their place, and yes, they can be useful under certain circumstances. But when it's time to get out of a powerful pin, whether it's mounted or side, you want to focus on a rising shrimp. The rising shrimp starts exactly the same way as a bridge. The idea is to put everything into 3 points: my shoulder, the ball of my foot, and the ball of the other foot. Just like so. And as a result, I'm displacing my opponent's body weight out to the side. I'm not taking him up and then trying to work from here. I'm moving him to the side so that his center of gravity is moving off me. And as a result, I can invert my knee and start to bring it in between us and form frames between elbows and knees that actually capture one of my opponent's legs. Once I capture one knee, I can always go across and capture the second leg later. That's the eternal pattern of escape. It is absolutely critical that you foster and develop the ability to generate power off the floor. If you cannot generate power off the floor using proper bridging mechanics and the rising shrimp, you're going to be a very frustrated jiu-jitsu player in bottom position. But if I can move my opponent's body weight, then I can ultimately put him back in guard at will. That is what you, as a practitioner of this sport, have to develop. Let's go over some solo drills first to ensure that you've got this crystal clear. And then once we feel we're confident applying it with our own body, we'll go back to our partner and go to work. So let's have an imaginary opponent out to our right-hand side. Let's get our arms in some kind of defensive frame, whether it be 2 arms in, 1 arm over, doesn't really matter. The main thing is that we have our near side frame in. Okay, that's the truly important one. Now, from here, I need to be able to move his body weight. We're not going to bridge up. We're going to start by putting our feet in this asymmetrical position, and then from here I start to look in the direction of the bridge. Don't have your head down where your own head will limit how far you can go. Have your ear down towards your opponent, and from here the whole thing is a bridge and a reach that puts us up onto 3 points: my shoulder, the ball of the foot, and the other ball of the foot. And from here, you have a position of power. The more extended your hips and the straighter the line of your body, the more powerful you are. Here, I lack power. Okay, this is not a mechanically strong position because my body is not extended. Only when there is hip extension can you move body weight. Okay, so our whole idea is to come up onto 3 points of our body with full hip extension. Again, it's not about the height of your bridge. You will see that when I perform this bridging mechanic, my hips are actually still very low to the ground. Okay, and from here, with that full extension, now I can form frames and bring knee and elbow together. That's going to enable me to capture a first leg at the knee. Once we capture the first leg, then we can go through and capture the second hip, and we can put people back in guard. But it's absolutely critical that you be able to hit your opponent with a significant force from bottom position. The only way you can apply significant force from bottom position is to use this method, where we come up, there's the asymmetrical leg position, and there's the explosion, which opens my chest and my hips to my opponent and moves body weight. You can add your bicep crossface, you can add your forearm crossface, but ultimately it's now about an ability to move away from him and form a frame between knee and elbow. And as a result, we can capture one leg and go across to the second hip. Let's have a look at this with a partner now. You'll notice Mateus is out to my right hand side. Once we get into a position like this, we get this key frame in place. Now, even as Mateus goes to apply a strong crossface, you can hear my voice changing as the power of his crossface is employed. Now, even from a disadvantageous situation like this, I can easily move his body and explode up off the floor. Now, as Mateus tries to recover his position, my hips are so far away from him that it's easy now to get that first leg captured. Once I've captured the first knee, then it's all about capturing the second hip. And from here, we move around the corner, and there's the second hip captured. My opponent's back now in a situation where I can go on the attack. This ability to come off the floor and hit your opponent's body with your body weight and move them in this constructive fashion is the key to getting out of these powerful side pins. One more time. Here's Mateus's strong body position. Okay, from here we lock in, position my body, and now look how everything is that expansion of my chest and hips. If Mateus lets go and walks away from me now, you'll see that's the body position we work with. I look in the direction of the bridge like I'm looking down towards the floor, and from here, everything's off the mat except my shoulder and the balls of my 2 feet. As a result, we can move away, knee and elbow frame, and we're back in business. So, here we are in the midst of a strong pin. From this position, I position my feet, we're ready to go. In one motion, there's the movement that we're looking for. I've captured the first knee, then the second hip, and we're back in business. Learning to use your body in this fashion to come up off the floor and get the majority of your surface area of your body off the mat, leaving only one shoulder and the balls of your 2 feet, is the key to getting out of this position. You must master the idea of hip extension. Hip extension occurs when we bridge, and now my upper body down to my knees is a relatively straight line. The more bent that line, the less powerful you are in this position, and the more likely you are to be returned flat on your back. This is where he wants me. From here, I want myself up off the floor in a position where the only thing in contact with the mat is my right shoulder and the balls of my feet. And as a result, now I can start shrimping. Now I can start framing with knee and elbow and putting people back in guard. Understand this, and you'll put a lot of people back in guard pretty damn quickly whenever you're being pinned across side. I'll just briefly cover some small tricks of the trade that I often use to gain a little bit of comfort in what is often a very uncomfortable situation. I'm sure you've all had the unpleasant experience of being pinned across side where you just feel you're getting hammered. The guy's got a strong crossface, his weight's all on your chest, and you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. And there's thoughts going through your mind where you just want to quit just from the pressure and discomfort of a side pin. I'm sure we've all been in that situation at some point. Let's just look at a few simple tricks to just relieve pressure, okay? It's a lot easier to escape when you're feeling relaxed than when you're completely stressed out by the maximal physical pressure of your opponent pinning you. So a few simple tricks which I often employ just to take the heat down a little bit so I can think a little more rationally, a little more clearly, and take my time to hit my various escapes. Probably the single most common problem you'll run into here is cross-facing. So a trick which I often employ when someone's got a strong cross-face is just a simple overwrap grip. As my opponent goes to apply a crossface, I will go wrist deep around my training partner's shoulder. As he goes to apply the crossface, I will physically put my chin inside the shoulder. Things become problematic when my opponent has an uncontested control of my chin and jawline. That's when all the problems start. So very often when I feel someone really putting some pressure on me here, I'll put my hand wrist deep inside and I'll put my elbow all the way through, just like so, and I'll come in on the shoulder. I start an action of turning my head inwards. If my head is just in perfect alignment and he applies a crossface, it's actually starting to strangle me here. It's so tight, okay? So what I do is I put the hand in, wrist deep. Don't just put your fingers in. Go in wrist deep. He goes to apply the crossface, and I physically turn my head into my own shoulder. So when he goes to apply the crossface, it's very, very difficult for him. Even if he comes up off his toes, it's hard for him to be effective. However, if the hand comes out and my head goes to neutral, you can hear my voice changing as he applies pressure. Okay? So I want to turn my head towards my own shoulder. And that always, in conjunction with the hand here, relieves pressure. He goes to drive on me, and look how I can move with the crossface and relieve a little pressure. Okay? Now, from situations like this, we can start other methods of small things we can do to take a little pressure off. Sometimes you feel the pressure is not so much the crossface as your opponent just literally just squeezing tight with his hands, and you feel like your chest is being compressed in these situations. Okay? Whenever we feel that kind of thing, I always go back into the hips and I start threatening here. Now he's got to start sitting through towards me, like so, sitting through, that's good, to kick my knee out of his hips. And that always relieves the pressure of a tight squeeze with the hands. Okay, so if he's on two knees and he squeezes as tight as he can, the squeezing, you can hear my voice getting disrupted by the power of squeeze as he goes to squeeze as tight as he can. In these situations, the guy always threatens with the knee. Now he's got to sit through, relieve pressure, and take the knee out of the hip, and that always relieves pressure on both the crossface and the squeezing of his arms. Now, these simple tricks will often create an alleviation in these unpleasant kinds of pressure that we often feel in bottom side control. So here Mateus is going to put pressure on me, and look how as he goes to squeeze with the hands, I threaten with the knee, he sits through in relation, takes my knee out, but loses the pressure of the hands. Now he goes to cross-face me, I pull down with my hand like so, and I turn my head in towards my own shoulder. And as a result, I can start to fight, hands in, and then ultimately put my training partner back in some variation of guard. So simple tricks like this, they have their place. When you feel you're just under complete duress and physical pressure, I'll often employ simple elements like this just to take a little bit of heat off the bottom of side control and let me think a little more clearly, buy a little more time, and then focus on what I need to do to escape and get out. Now, one of the most frustrating things that can ever occur is you develop a lot of time, develop a strong elbow escape, and then your opponent reacts by taking one of his hands and blocking your hip with his hand. And now you can't bring your knee inside and you can't get any kind of elbow escape to work. What do we do now? Let's have a look at the problem first. Mateus is across my side and he has his hands locked in the regular position. He feels that I've got a strong elbow escape. So he takes this hand here and he blocks my hip. Sometimes they grab the gi pants, sometimes they just put a hand on the floor. It's up to him. Now, typically in these situations, they usually take the second arm and go over the head. Why? Because if he doesn't take the second arm over the head, there's nothing to prevent my head from moving away from my opponent. So he needs to take his second arm and lock over my head. And now, when I try to elbow escape and bring my knee in, you can see his elbow blocks my knee from entering. I can't get the knee inside, I can't get anything going here. So what do I do now? Under these circumstances, I often recommend shrimping away. He can grab my gi pants, that's fine. From here, I look to shrimp away from my opponent, and I take my hand and I put my hand inside his bicep. So I pommel my hand inside the bicep, just like so. Now, when I go to shrimp away from my opponent, I elbow escape not on his leg, but on his bicep, just like so. And I bring my knee inside. And as a result, now I can reach my training partner's knee. My opponent now will need to recover his position. And from here, we end up back in the safety of guard position. So if I feel I have an opponent across my side, and he intelligently changes his hand position to shut down my elbow escape, from here I got to modify my elbow escape now. So I turn onto my side, I bring my hand and elbow inside his, and as a result I can shrimp out and bring my knee inside my training partner's bicep. And as a result, it's not a difficult thing for us to start moving away from our opponent. And from here, we can quickly put him back in guard. This is a nice, simple expedient to deal with this hand trap situation.